Paris, I get the impression it's been going on a bit longer than in other parts of, at least other parts of northern France, and perhaps other parts of France in general. But it's interesting because the French, they've always had kind of the reputation of being like more liberal, more cosmopolitan, more like, kind of more like xenophilic than other European nationalities. And I think there's definitely some truth to that because I do see in France a lot of like mixed race couples and a lot of couples with, mixed race children or women with mixed race children. And it tends to be, as I've said, overwhelmingly like white women with non-white children and not the other way around. So there seems to be like a gender imbalance in that regard. But like, my point is, okay, France does have this reputation, but at the same time, like the Front National has done very well in a number of elections here. So I feel like there is simmering beneath the surface some discontent with the liberal cosmopolitan order of France. Maybe some people wanting a bit less egalite and a bit more fraternité. And yeah, I don't know, like, I feel like it must be overwhelmingly men, I get the impression, who would support the Front National. It probably is statistically, because it often is in most countries. But, like, as I've mentioned before, like, a lot of, just from looking at it from the numbers alone, like, a lot of the white men in France must be incels, simply because you have so many cases of, like, white women with non-white men, but very few of the opposite in comparison, which means that, just do the math, look at the numbers, there have to be a lot of white men out there in France who just aren't getting any or don't have a partner of any sort. Like, it just, to me, it looks obvious. And it from what I've seen, yeah, I've noticed a lot of, white French men out and about without a woman, by themselves or with other men. So yeah, I mean, there does seem to be a bit of an imbalance in that regard, and I'd imagine that's where a lot of the support for the Front National comes from. But yeah, looking at the country, not just from a demographic perspective, but also like an architectural perspective, like I would say northern France, it definitely feels more northern European than southern European in terms of the architecture. Like you see, like in terms of a lot of the motifs, like for instance, a lot of the historic buildings, they have like roofs that are like blue, dark blue or black. Like you can even see it here, like the color of the shingles. And in southern Europe, like in the more Mediterranean countries, you often get like red, like kind of like terracotta roofs and stuff like that. And it's like, I would say like overall, like you can see here kind of how some of the architecture looks. And I would say personally, I think it looks, more reminiscent overall of like, say, German or British architecture as opposed to like, say, like Spanish or Italian. But again, it varies from one part of France to the next, because in southern France, the architecture looks very Mediterranean. Like it is very Mediterranean. It's very similar to like Italian or Spanish architecture. So like, and there's definitely a lot in between, like as you go throughout the country, like subtle variations, like where one style kind of blends into the next from one region to another. And as you get closer to the border, there's more influences from other countries. Like as you get closer to Spain, there's more Spanish influences. As you get closer to Italy, there's more Italian influences. As you get closer to Germany, more German influences. As you get closer to Belgium, more Belgian influences, etc. So, like, as Belgian influences would really mean Dutch influences, because yeah, because Belgium's really a combination of French and Dutch influences to begin with. But yeah, I guess that's my point overall, is like that's what makes France unique and interesting, and that's what I like about it, is like the combination of northern and southern aspects. In some ways, you could say, it has the best of both worlds in some regards, worst of both worlds in others. But overall, like, I think that's what makes France a fascinating country, is that it is that bridge between southern and northern Europe. And you can see it also in, like, I'd say certain aspects of the culture too. Like, for instance, the way people were celebrating a few weeks ago in Paris after Paris won the soccer game. It was very boisterous, very loud. Like, people were honking their horns, like chanting. It was pretty crazy, and there were riots too, broken windows, stuff like that. People fighting police, and it's like, I guess the UK does get some of that also, to be fair. But I'd say it's an example of how overall, like, France is, maybe, a bit more chaotic than Northern Europe, but maybe a bit more orderly than Southern Europe. So it's kind of like an in-between in that regard too. Like, even at its most chaotic, nowhere in France feels as anywhere near as chaotic as somewhere like Naples, for instance. But maybe it doesn't feel quite as orderly as, like, Copenhagen or Edinburgh either. So it's kind of like, it's like an in-between kind of country. But I would say this part of France definitely feels more Northern European overall, like Brittany. Like, I would say another way in which France maybe feels a bit less aggressively Northern European is, like, for instance, with, like, the way certain laws are enforced. Like, I remember there's sometimes at construction sites, they'd be, like, operating equipment, machinery, vehicles, and they let people just kind of walk by pretty close to it. I feel like in an Anglo or Germanic country, they wouldn't do that. They'd be like, they'd cordon it off, and they'd be very, very strict, like, strict about, like, you can't walk here right now. You can't walk anywhere near these construction vehicles, like stuff like that. Like, I feel like they're maybe slightly more willing to, like, bend the rules on stuff here. And there's another example of that, like motorbikes. Like, sometimes they'll go by on, like, streets that are probably not meant for cars and stuff like that. And it's like, again, like, as I've said, it's the middle ground. So it's like, it's not quite as chaotic as, like, Naples or somewhere like that, but it's not quite as orderly as, like, Germany or Denmark or what have you. In terms of, like, attitudes toward, like, just, like, how strictly everything has to abide by the letter of the law and whatever, like, things like that. And again, I'm not trying to say Southern Europe is, like, full-on chaotic. It's obviously nowhere near as chaotic as, like, places further south, like, North Africa and then Sub-Saharan Africa, or, like, third world in general. But what I'm saying is, like, you do notice that throughout Europe, like, generally speaking, the further north you go, the more orderly it feels, and the further south you go, the more chaotic it feels. Like, kind of for better and for worse in both regards. Like, for instance, one reason why I feel like a lot more architecture has been preserved in Southern Europe is because I feel like a lot of Northern Europeans get, like, really anal retentive about, like, building safety codes or whatever bullshit. And that might have been part of the reason for why a lot of historic buildings were torn down, especially in, like, some of these Scandinavian countries where you can't really blame World War II for it, because they weren't as directly affected by World War II to the same extent as, like, Germany or the UK. Whereas, like, I feel France in that regard is a bit more Southern European, in the sense they do leave up a lot of their historic buildings, and a lot of them are still here, including many really old ones, like medieval. And I would say even in regards to certain things, like, say, the way people's kids behave, like, I've noticed here in France, a lot of people don't, like, a lot of the parents don't seem very strict at all in, like, how they discipline their kids. Like, I see kids, like, running around acting like little shits, and the parents don't always seem to care that much. So I feel like maybe that's another kind of, the liberté part of it. The more kind of lax joie de vivre attitude, as opposed to, like, in my opinion, Anglo and Germanic countries are probably stricter in that regard. But I'd say, like, France does cluster with Northwestern Europe in a number of metrics, like, say, like, GDP per capita, HDI, quality of living. Like I'd say it clusters more so with northwestern like Anglo and Germanic countries as opposed to like with the Mediterranean countries like Italy, Spain, and Portugal. So I mean it does vary. Like I would say in certain respects France is more Northern European, in certain respects it's more Southern European, and it definitely varies from one part of France to the other. But yeah, I guess those are my general thoughts on France. Yeah, so I've enjoyed this trip, and it's a great country to visit. I think just watch your ass in Paris. Like it does get a bit dodgy there, but yeah.